Shalom, everyone. It is April the 11th, 2022. We are just a few days before Pesach, so this class is going to be devoted to Pesach this week, and I have some material to share with you on that. So, in thinking about the preparing for Pesach, we just need to go back to the most important themes of the Seder itself. I think that these themes are basically the bookends of the Seder, one of which is B'chol hamarbeh l'saper b'tziat Mitzrayim harev ze meshubach. All of those who expand in the telling of the Exodus are to be praised. And then the second theme, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every generation, a person must see himself or herself as if he or she personally went out of Egypt. Those are basically the themes of the Seder, and I would just encapsulate them in a couple of sentences. One being the telling, the more creative or the more expansive ways that you can tell the story, great. And the more you can see yourself inside the story, great. So you have to be as innovative and creative and also masterful at storytelling, that is to say, master the details of the story, and you have to personalize the story. You have to see yourself inside the story. And those two are not necessarily the same thing, although great storytellers will tell you that the secret to being a really good storyteller is to actually see yourself in the story. When I took a little course in this as a young student in Toronto, University of Toronto, it wasn't a university course, but there was something called the Storytellers School of Toronto. So I took a little class there, and these were remarkable people, storytellers, and they said the technique of storytelling, that is to say, the once upon a time oral storytelling, is to actually see yourself inside the story as you tell the story. And that has always stayed with me, so that you are making an imaginative leap when you are telling the story. And that's the way that you should be telling the story. It puts us into a really interesting theoretical question, which is, does the Haggadah function as the script for the story, or does the Haggadah function as something else? And so I offer you my conversation with my colleagues this week. We talk about this subject, and we basically come to the conclusion that the Haggadah itself is not the story script. The Haggadah is a manual for the symbolic stages of telling the story. They are prompts for you to tell the story through symbolic stages, and that is punctuated by both the drinking of wine and the speaking about and eating of symbolic foods. So we have, I think, a need. The need is that the Haggadah itself, it functions like a script, but people also need additional scripts. And every year, new Haggadot come out, but at this point, we all own many different editions of the Haggadah. So my supplement here includes the following things, and we'll just we'll go straight into that. Okay. So what I'm starting out with here is what's called a word cloud. A word cloud, if you're not familiar with, is it's a program. It's very easily to be accessed on the internet. And what you do is you take any text, okay? You click on the whole text, and the word cloud program basically finds the frequency of certain words and projects that in a diagram like this, which tells you what the frequency is. This, I think, is such a very helpful little tool. I put in the text of the English translation of the Haggadah. The English translation I got from the website Safaria, which this is the text from Open Siddur. Open Siddur. It's a crowdsourced translation of the Haggadah. And so what you have here, the larger words are more frequent in the Haggadah, and the smaller words are less frequent. And these are the 50 top words in the English translation of the Haggadah. So I'll just do a little bit of an exercise here for 30 seconds, which is, what are the most common words and what are the least common words? Just give me, shout out anybody.
God, Egypt, night, Israel, scripture.
Yeah, okay. Very good. Okay, so these are the frequency of that. I like the fact that this one, little goat, is there because little goat appears in Haggadah at least a dozen times, right? I don't know how many stanzas there are in Haggadah, but that tells you the frequency of it, okay? And that just by looking at it, you get a visual depiction of the conceptual web of the Haggadah. I like that. It's kind of like, we'll stop, we'll look at this, we'll make associations. I don't think you need to really have a big discussion about this, but if you want to see what the Haggadah is about, it's pretty much here. Okay, Passover, Adonai, God, Scripture, sovereignty, day, bitter herbs, great fearsomeness, messenger of evil, all these things. This is what it is, and this is the Haggadah for us. Okay. Any other reactions to the cloud, the word cloud? And by the way, yeah, go ahead.
Hashem is big, and God of Egypt is like, it's hard to read.
Land of Egypt, family of Aaron, holy city, festival of Matzot, Egypt here. And which Egypt are you referring to? God of Egypt, there you go. Yeah, tiny. So there's not too much frequency of that in the Haggadah. Interesting. Go ahead, Nanette.
So what sticks out to me is kindness. In fact, I don't remember even seeing that word kindness.
So that's very interesting. And the reason why kindness is in there and is because in the Hallel, after the meal, it's ki liolam chazdo. His kindness is everlasting. And that word is part of a phrase that's repeated. I think there are 20 something verses in that psalm. And that's why that word. And so, and it's very interesting that the program, the word cloud program, it doesn't know what the narrative is. It just spits out what's important. And so the fact that you have this word repeated so many times tells you how important it is. And so when someone like you or me looks at a page like this and says, oh my goodness, kindness is part of it. So then you ask the question, well, how does kindness figure into the story? And what role does kindness play in Yetziat Mitzrayim? And I think that that's a very fertile conversation because it says, how do people behave under incredible stress? That's the question. That's the discussion question. Look at what's going on in the world today. We have a population of millions of people under tremendous stress because of the war. How are they behaving, with kindness to one another, or are they cruel to one another? And then of course, this kindness is referring to God's everlasting kindness. To what extent is that playing itself out in the deliverance of the people? And I think there's a lot to be said for the presence of that. It's just, this is a trigger for these kinds of conversations. Yes, Nanette, go ahead.
Yeah, so you know what? I mean, we just saw it in the movie the other night, the Ten Commandments. Moses was very, once he realized he was a Jew, he went back to being a Jew, he went into the mud pits. He was very kind in saving the old guy that was, mixing the muds. And he said, Moses was really into being kind. He saved the old woman from, being with the stones. He was very kind.
Yeah, but
And
he
even
also
though,
killed the Egyptian.
I just want to say one thing. Even though, in the movie and in the Torah, we're reading about Moses, but in the Haggadah, we don't really see the name Moses except maybe once. So maybe, this is a big stretch, maybe God is being very kind in displaying Moses's all his actions, in the Parshas, but in the Haggadah, he's the big way. He's handling everything.
So God certainly is the driving force of the story in the Haggadah, like as far as the Haggadah, and you're quite right, Moses is not mentioned. But we have to approach it with a critical eye, because Moses does act with great anger and great ruthlessness when he and it's because of his overwhelming sense of justice. I think that's what's going on. Why he kills the Egyptian taskmaster, whether or not he kills him out of premeditated desire, or whether it's manslaughter, I'm in the camp that believes that he killed him accidentally and therefore has to go into exile. The point is that he's capable of acting with tremendous anger also, and that's certainly borne out by some of the later stories. Anybody else want to react to some of these words in the word cloud? I don't see everybody, but if you want to, just jump in there, unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next one. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so another way of looking at the Haggadah is to ask the question: how has this, as literature, influenced language? And I did this little kind of almanac exercise, basically, to say, okay, so the Haggadah, as in all books of classic literature, influences the way we speak. To a certain extent, we don't draw in modern English. We do not draw from classical English literature the way language used to. We draw more from popular culture than we do from classics. So more things from enter into the language from places like Saturday Night Live now. I mean, there'll be figures of speech that come in from a movie or from a skit or from comedy, rather than the classic sources of literature. But in modern Hebrew still very much draws very, very much from classical sources. When modern Hebrew was being reinvented, Eliezer ben Yehuda basically went to these sources for words, but the language lives in the marketplace, in the street. When the language has to be the language of the marketplace in the street in order for it to live in, and people in the marketplace and on the street share an oral culture that is very much shaped by the Bible and by Jewish liturgy, and in no small measure the Passover Haggadah. Look, I can go to all of these. I'm going to just make it like this so you don't see the inspiration. But you all probably can recognize Kol Dichvin, right? So I can trigger, your associations, it won't take you long to remember that Kol Dichvin is from Halach Ma'anya, not Kol Dichvin Yetevi Yechol, Kol Dichvin. But Kol Dichvin in modern Hebrew means like, it means everybody who needs, everybody who wants, right? So it's an expression that will that you'll hear when people are lining up for a vaccine, right? And they'll say Kol Dichvin, anybody who wants it, you can have it. Kol Dichvin.
I think it may also be the name of a soup kitchen, but I'm not sure.
Possibly, okay. Manishtana, of course, comes in both literally and in sarcastically. When people say, "What's the difference?" Manishtana. What's so different? But to someone who has just a little bit of Jewish literacy, hearing Manishtana in modern Hebrew gives you just a little echo of its origin, namely the Seder, which is. It has two meanings in the Seder, as we know. It's manishtana, wow, how different it is. And the second is or how is this night different? It's also how different and how is this night different? And then the sarcastic way of intoning it, which is, no, how different is this? Nothing has changed, right? Manishtana, okay? The Amda is if you fulfill a promise. So a person who fulfills something says, "V'hishamda lavotenu." V'hishamda. This is the promise that God has fulfilled for us. Is part of modern Hebrew. Tze'ulmad, which is the rabbinic expression for go out and learn. Tze'ulmad, and then you have Bimtamat, which is the Haggadah's way of it's in the Bible. They came down in small numbers. Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz has a lot of different meanings. Derech Eretz in modern parlance is just being a menschlichkeit, but Derech Eretz is also the way of the world. It's the way the world operates, the proper maintenance of systems and institutions. But today we say Derech Eretz is to the way that someone behaves. You have to behave with Derech Eretz. Ba'otot muftim, you hear this sometimes when military people speak, and they're talking about lots of rockets and displays of power. So ba'otot muftim, signs and wonders. Biyad chazakah. So when Israel has to punish terrorists, they have to do it biyad chazakah, with a strong hand. Okay? Choshech Mitzrayim. Choshech Mitzrayim is the way that you describe pitch black. In modern Hebrew, if something is really, really dark outside, it's Choshech Mitzrayim. And lastly, Lashana Ba'ah, which is an expression that we all use. And of course, I've pinned it here on the Seder, but it doesn't necessarily have to only be at the Seder. So the conversation is really, how does literature and how does the Jewish canon affect language? Now, obviously people who have a little more knowledge in Hebrew can be more attuned to this, but you could even ask the question, well, why is it that certain expressions in Yiddish have come and be, are part of us? Can you give me an example of a Yiddish, of something in English that came in through Yiddish, and how it affected our language? So I'll give you an example. The bottom line. The bottom line is an expression that is translated from Yiddish. Okay?
What's the Yiddish?
I forget it, but that's what I learned. Go ahead. Who else?
Mensch. Mensch.
Mensch. Mensch. Right?
Meshuggah.
Meshuggah, or don't hakmir near hakmir nishkina chaynik. Right? Okay.
I don't think that.
Okay. The Seder is an important time to talk about being Jewish. So, because people encounter Judaism really at the Seder. Most of the year, people are not really aware or coming close to their Jewishness. So I'm offering here 10 reasons why you should be Jewish. And they're not like, well, maybe we'll see what you think of that. I say you should be Jewish because nowhere else do you have Shabbat. Judaism, to be a Jew, one of the great things about being Jewish is Shabbat. It is the thing that I would say it like this: if you were to give truth serum to any religious Jew and ask them if you had to give away everything else in Judaism but keep one thing, what would be the one thing you keep? And I pretty much guarantee that everyone would say Shabbat. And the reason for that is because Shabbat, on so many levels, gives us great joy. And the thing about Shabbat is, no matter at what point you access Shabbat, and no matter what fraction you have Shabbat, it makes a claim on your life. And for that reason alone, it's worth it to be Jewish. I get, I can be sustained as a human being because of Shabbat. That alone is worth. That's the benefit of Judaism. It's almost like asking, why be Jewish? Because as a Jew, you have Shabbat. You can obviously have something like that, not as a Jew, but as a Jew, you have a special gift and a special access to this unique experience, which I would say in the context of very many different patterns of observance, gives you whatever you put into it. Whatever you put into Shabbat, you'll get out of Shabbat. And that has been one of the great things about Judaism forever. I think the same thing can be said about Torah. Why be Jewish? Because being Jewish gives you access to a conversation in a way that no other religion gives you an access to a constant conversation. We have, of course, every religion has its textual tradition, but no other religion makes the claim that you have as much right to have the conversation and to have your voice be a part of the conversation as, let's say, a voice of 2,000 years ago. I think about this all the time because, we study the Torah. Part of the frustration in studying the Torah is, everything that has ever been thought of has been written down. Everything that has ever been discovered has been discovered. So what is it what kind of new element can I add to the Torah? Could I even add that? And the answer is, the Torah has never been studied by me. It's my voice. Of course, I'm going to find things that my ancestors and other, people have found in the Torah. And of course, I'm going to learn from them. But, Rashi spoke in Rashi's way, and I'm going to speak in my way. Not that I'm in anywhere, near that, but it's like I have a right. And it's almost the same way of saying, all the great themes of literature have been used. Yeah, okay, but you have a right to also. All the chord patterns have been made now. They've all been discovered, but there's something that you can find, and there's something in the way that you can experience this that is yours and it is different, and that is part of a larger whole, and that is what it means to be Jewish. Okay, and the more attuned we are to that understanding, I think the deeper our appreciation of our Jewishness is. Go ahead, Nanette. Yeah.
So, Rabbi, as you know, I'm in. I bought into it. I bought the house here. I moved here. I'm totally 400% into it. Look, my granddaughter, my daughter-in-law, I'm into it. Oh my God. But so, Rabbi, please address, what about the assimilated Jews? What do you have to say? I mean, I don't think they really do Shabbat,
So I'm not asking the assimilated Jews to suddenly stop their assimilated lives and become Orthodox. What I'm asking them to do is to find a point of entry into Shabbat. I mean, we'll do the marketing of this and say how great it is, but at a certain point, there's a point of access that you can come to. Now, I obviously would admit that not every point of access to Shabbat is going to be as powerful or as reinforcing. But when I tell some people who are not particularly observant or don't have much of a relationship, and to Judaism or Jewish community, and say, look, here's what you can do that's accessible. Make yourself a Friday night dinner, okay? Stop the world for 2 hours on a Friday night and say to the most important people in your life that this is our time, and make a dinner that can consist of anything you want, but that's slightly different from the rest of the week. And then add to it elements that are special and related to this day, like challah and wine. That's Shabbat. Now, some may criticize that and say that, that's the lowest common denominator. I don't think so at all, because if you say to someone, turn off your phone, turn off your television, turn off your computer, sit down with each other for an hour, for 2 hours, and do nothing else but sit across a table beside each other at a meal with your family, you would be surprised how that is refreshing for people. And it takes enormous effort to have enough discipline to stop everything and to turn everything off. Judaism is not a add water and mix religion, but it's not complicated either. It does, though, we are arguing, it does make a minimal demand on you, which is behave in a certain way within a certain kind of boundary for a certain amount of time. All we're saying is, we're making this ask the same way that, when you go to the theater, you're asked not to talk for 2 hours so you can watch a film. You're asked to turn your phone off when you watch it. Those are minimal asks so that you can enjoy the cultural product of the movie, right? So maybe what's going on here is that people have, I'll be a little critical and say that the reason why there's a certain aversion to this is because of deeper roots and deeper problems related to their relationship to their Jewish identity. That's what's going on. Any other questions there regarding the Torah? Okay. So I go on and say to be Jewish is to be chosen, goodness and morality, and there are lots of other reasons, and you'll look through that when you get the sheet. I can send this all to you. You'll get it all in the thing. Last thing, to be a Jew is to have access to meaning in every waking moment, even while asleep. I really believe that being a Jew is the source of the greatest meaning in your life. And this conversation it needs to be fortified, especially at the Seder, especially when at the Seder there are people coming in with different kinds of valences towards their Jewishness. Okay, so another topic altogether is, okay, how is the Seder a story? If you look up, for example, how to teach a story, if you were teaching the story in a class of literature, what are the elements of any story? What are the elements of any good story? So we'll start with the elements: setting, characters, plot, conflict, resolution, point of view, and theme. So I think a nice way, an interesting way to generate a conversation at the Seder is ask, how is the story told? and what are the elements of the story, such that if we can identify those elements, we will have a greater appreciation of the story. So what is the setting of the story? The setting of the story is Egypt, and the setting of the story is a particular time. So there's a temporal setting and a geographical setting, and already that is important to localize, and of course we could use a map for that. The characters, who are the main characters? Well, reading the story, it's God, Pharaoh, Moses, the Aaron, Miriam, minor characters, and here I gave Miriam credit for being a major character. She's probably more of a minor character. But Moses, because I'm feminist, right? Moses' parents, Pharaoh's daughter, midwives, the magicians, all of these have like walk-on roles in the Exodus story. What's the plot? The Israelites have become numerous. Pharaoh feels threatened by them and enacts policies of genocide and enslavement. The Israelites yearn for freedom. God remembers his covenant with Israel's ancestors and fulfills his promise to redeem them from servitude and bring them into the promise. That's the plot. The plot is God is going to redeem the descendants of those he made a relationship with and bring them to the promised land. It doesn't exactly go that way so simply, because they have some problems after they get out of Egypt. But the main plot of the Torah is bring yourself, God, it's God, bring yourself to humanity, make a special relationship with a special family, connect to the descendants of that family, make your relationship with that people, and then bring them out and bring them back into the land. And the chat here says, Rabbi, per early comment, would you add us, the people, as characters as well? Yes, I would. I have my favorite statement, which is, we are the most important symbol on the Seder. I think I have this in this sheet. If not, I should put it in there. I was thinking also about subplots. There are lots of different subplots in the Passover story, which are themselves fascinating. You have a subplot of Moses and his wife, Moses and his father-in-law. That's a subplot. You have Moses and his brother. You have Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's daughter. All of these constitute different kinds of subplots within the story, each of which is fascinating. What's the conflict? The conflict is pretty clear. It's God versus Pharaoh. It's monotheism versus paganism. It's slavery versus freedom. And it's Moses versus Pharaoh, and it's Israel versus Egypt. And all of this is where the story resides. The story resides in these conflicts. How does the story resolve itself? After a series of 10 plagues, God crushes the Egyptians, forcing Pharaoh to release the Israelites from bondage, only to regret the decision shortly thereafter. Pharaoh proceeds to chase the freed Israelites into the Sea of Reeds, which they miraculously cross. When the Egyptians enter the seabed, the waters close over them. They tumble to their deaths. Having traversed the boundary from slavery to freedom, the Israelites are now free to enter into a covenant with God. In other words, the resolution is you move from slavery to freedom, you break the bonds of your relationship to Pharaoh and form the bonds of a new relationship with God. That's the resolution of the story. What is the point of view in the story? It's a very good question, in terms of the story as a story. When you read the book of Exodus and you tell the story, you're telling it from an omniscient narrator's point of view. These are the children of Israel, the names of the children of Israel as they go. So it's a narrator is telling you the story. And Moses said to Pharaoh, let my people go. It's a narrator. But we make a little sleight of hand when we tell the story, is that we are in the story. As I said before, so part of the strategy in telling the story is to imagine yourself being there. So the story is from the point of view of an omniscient narrator, but we are also seeing ourselves there. And the theme, redemption, freedom, God's fulfillment of his promise, from anguish to deliverance, from indignity to dignity, from the depths to the heights. Those are the themes. So I find this framework of 7 elements to be very, very useful in understanding the richness of the story. We don't look at the story from that particular perspective. I get very granular in looking at the literary qualities of the story, but I've never really done the 10,000-foot view of the story as a story with its plot, its characters, its setting, its theme, its conflict, and its resolution. And all of these things are central elements in the telling of a story. I'll stop there and see if anybody has any comment. Let me look at you all. All right. So far, so good. We good? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Along with the text and these subcomponents, you often during the Parsha talk about feelings and affects. And I'm curious, where do you see the emotions playing into the storytelling process to make the story motivating in different ways and engaging?
So the question really is, would that be an 8th element or a 9th element? And in the little research I did for that, there are other elements. I don't know to what extent, people who teach literature focus on it. The whole experience of a story is, on many levels. It's an intellectual experience, and it's an experience of empathy and emotion as well. So, that's what literature, when it's good, literature does that. It as all art does, it creates in us some kind of affective response. We do, when it's skillfully taught and skillfully told, we are relating to the wonder of it. We are relating to the pain. When it says, for example, they oppressed the Egyptians, or when it says that Pharaoh told her, when you give birth to a male child, throw it into the Nile. When you daven that verse, you may not think about it, okay? But when you read it slowly and close your eyes and imagine it, spend a moment to pause on it and say, is that really what happened? Did they really have to do that? That's an experience that's genocidal. Is that what they experienced? And of course, we are not far removed in history from genocidal experiences, as a people, and in witnessing other genocides around us. Susie,
Could I follow? Could I just quick follow-up? What makes you very effective, for example, as a storyteller, is you often put in the emotional part. If you just read the Haftorah in a monologue, the words are there, but what do you enunciate firmly? Where does humor come in?
Sure.
Where does anger come in? So I'm just sort of curious your thoughts on that.
My thoughts is that's what study is about. I'm learning this all the time, and I think that the Haggadah is the instrument par excellence in Judaism that reinforces the message: you can always find something new. The Haggadah states this almost verbatim when at the beginning of the Haggadah it says, here I am, I'm almost 70 years old, and I never really understood this until Ben Zoma said. And every time I read that, I think of the fact that here are the rabbis who think that they know everything, but here an insight that completely changes the way they have thought about it. And that the purpose of that is to validate both the innovative tendency in study and the curiosity and the desire to find new meanings. We certainly want to develop mastery over texts, but mastery without that little bit of creativity and innovation and the desire to find a new way to understand it, what I want to say is I get a lot of joy out of it. And so the way to do this is the Bible specifically, but great literature by extension, but the Bible specifically demands of you to take it seriously, not to read it and daven it, but it wants you to read it and reread it, and we make the mistake a lot of thinking that, just because we've said it and we're finished, we've done our obligation. Yes, reading is an obligation, but having it, live inside you, that's a lifelong challenge. That's what it's about. Susie, go ahead.
Just two quick things. Natan Sharansky's daughter, Rachel Sharansky Danziger, talks about storytelling in the Bible in terms of the way the story is told and what meaning that gives. And yesterday I was at a Zoom that was broadcast from Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia. And Rabbi Gabai there said, he said, and the thing is, he said, I am from Egypt. He was born in Egypt. So it was a humorous moment. So every year, he has that opportunity. It's like he can, it's not the ki'ilu.
So you raise a very interesting point, which is, how do we make that leap? And I think it's much more complicated for modern Jews than it's ever been, specifically since none of us has a relationship with, a oppression or peril in the way that people a generation do. I mean, maybe we may have had echoes of it, but so it's very interesting when I read contemporary Haggadot now, it veers much more into the spiritual, and that the Haggadah becomes an allegory for the kinds of spiritual enslavement that we have experienced through other kinds of things, whether they are addictions or certain kinds of emotional issues or spiritual issues or psychological tendencies that we need to break through. And so the metaphor of the Exodus is very useful for allowing people to find their own personal Egypt from which they have to break the bonds. Nanette, go ahead.
So, Rabbi, I really love what you just said. Don't take it seriously, but don't take it too seriously. So I want to show you. Can you see it?
Yeah, Sammy Spider's first Haggadah.
So I want to tell you, I'm the leader, and this, you know what? This Seder, this Haggadah is really serious. The only thing it does not include is 4 cups of wine. But I got to tell you, I don't agree with a lot of, I don't want to say the Orthodox, but that's who's telling me, they don't worry so much about, say, 13-month-old babies. But I do, and I think it's important to include even the little ones. And I got to tell you also one last thing. So my young family, my son, his wife, they really appreciate this. They like it. It's fun. I have finger puppets. I have the whole thing, and you know what? It comes alive.
And it should, and you should use it. And I think, look, the Seder is, you design a Seder for who's going to be at your table, right? If you have children at your table, you direct it towards children. After all, this is the experience in which you're transmitting the story to children. And one of the things that we have discovered, as my children are now older, they're using things that they learned, while as children. These are things that get replicated over the generations. That's important. And the more material, the more creativity, the more play that's involved with that, the more affinity they'll have towards the experience altogether. I think these have been innovations over the last several decades already. We've been talking along these lines of the games at the Seder, the skits at the Seder, the conversations, the quizzes, the various things on the table, symbols, the plagues, etc. You have to be a bit of an engineer to understand, that if there are older people, they want a different kind of experience. We can't always, focus it on the young. but there's a way to keep it moving, and there's a way for everyone to have their place in it. And of course, when children are there, they are to be the center stage at the Seder. That's what it's about. Gittel, you have your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to put in a plug for what you did many years ago. You gave us the Pesach passport. And that is something that my children, my grandchildren grown, they want that Pesach set. It's a piece of the Seder. Now it's going to the next generation. But it's a way for them really to keep very conscious all the parts of the Seder. They're there, they're in front of them, and they have the whole sequence. And I would encourage you to send it out again, because I think it's
find it. It's in the files, or it's very easy to make again. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, if I could share a screen, I actually sent you, Rabbi, last night this thing about modern hieroglyphics and the Seder with this emoji Haggadah, which apparently some Jewish person in New Jersey developed. And if you think of the symbols that are there, the sort of, besides the text, the visual emojis, which so many in the younger generation are now using, and the creation of graphic novels. What are your thoughts about this as another strategy to present the Haggadah?
Absolutely. Anything that works, that kindles an imagination, that makes a connection. There's really no, we're telling the story. So the real question is, what's in the story and what's outside the story? There you go. So long ago, this is like whatchamacallit, what's it called? Well, it's emojis, right? Yeah,
and they have the 4 sons, and they have the whole text has been converted into some without, not just language, but just pure emojis.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, with a younger generation with short attention spans, there you get text, visualization, feelings, all of that in one.
All of that is good. In other words, the more means that you can tell the story, the better. And the emoji is one of those means. Look, the Passover experience altogether has within it multiple modalities for telling a story. Think about food as one. Think about story. Think about the visual on the Haggadah. We had a beautiful lecture last week with Efi Shoham on illustrated. The illustrations in the Haggadah are to enhance the storytelling of it. I think that was a very powerful theme in what he said, is that people commission Haggadot in order to use the Haggadah as a teaching tool at the table, not only as a kind of to kind of be boastful about their wealth and their ability, but there's a visual dialogue that's taking place. Music, singing is really one of the critical ways that we convey. We think that it's only about the last songs, but it's when you think about all the different songs in the Haggadah, from Halach Ma'anya to Manishtana to Avadim Ayinu to Baruch HaMakom to Avihisha Amda, the music of the Seder captures a certain mood, and as you've heard me talk about different musical experiences, music itself conveys a type of information also, whether it's simply the information of a play and joy, like Chad Gadya and Echad Miyodea, which is full of repeat and lots of upbeat melodies, or whether it is more solemn, like Vihisha Amda or Eliyahu Hanavi or other things. And you would be surprised as to how much emotional information you can encode in conveying the Seder experience with music. I think that's really good. Marlene.
Repetition.
I'm repeating what you said.
That we get from hearing things either during the year, like Eliyahu Hanavi, or having alluded to it at other times. But from year to year, as you pointed out, your children remember, or Gittel's passport. It's something that was in the past that we review, and it bolsters up your understanding.
Absolutely.
And your ownership and agency.
And your sense of mastery over it, which gives you the freedom to interpret it again. Okay. All right, let me go to another thing here, which is 3 creative wells to tell a story. So I just have excerpts here of, I don't know if you remember the Chronicles. I love this. Sudden death strikes men and cattle. Last night at the exact state, we can convey this. It's very easy to write these things. You don't need much creativity. Last night at the exact hour of midnight, God stretched out his hand against Egypt for the 10th time and struck down every firstborn Egyptian son. From the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the lowliest prisoner in the land, even the firstborn among the cattle died. It is difficult to describe the woe and wailing of the bereaved mothers and the terrible fear and the sense of catastrophe that have descended upon Egypt. This night will be marked forever in the annals of Egypt with a night of incredible horror and suffering. I wrote this skit. I created a skit about Moses appearing before the Standing Subcommittee on Exodus Preparation. Good afternoon, Moses. As you know, we have been meeting over the course of the last several months to make sure we are prepared for the Exodus. I've called this meeting because 9 plagues already have completed. We have reason to believe that our Exodus is imminent, and we wanted to summon you before the Congress of the People of the Children of Israel to get an update from you. As you know, our committee consists of representatives of the 2 parties, the Leave Party and the Stay Party. But before we get into the questions, we would like to hear your opening statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our ancestors came down to Egypt over 200 years ago. You recall that God had promised our founding father Abraham that he would become a great nation. That didn't happen right away. There was Isaac and there was Jacob, and only with Jacob did his family become a nucleus of the people of Israel. Fast forward, the sons of Jacob hate Joseph. They sell him to Egypt as a slave. There's a famine, and in the land they come down for food, and the rest, they say, is history. A new Pharaoh arose who does not remember Joseph, and he began to enact enslavement policies against our people. We endured the suffering for many generations, but God promised that he would take us out of Egypt, and we have already witnessed 9 plagues of his against the Egyptians. First there was blood, then there were frogs, then there was lice. For the sake of time, I won't list them all, but we have just witnessed the plague of darkness. I am told by our intelligence sources that the plague of darkness was devastating for Egypt, but for all of Israel there was light. And now we are prepared for the final plague, which God has informed me will take place, God willing, very soon. So I will issue instructions that all Israel shall remain indoors until the 14th of Nisan, all day and into the night, and take precautionary measures on an evening that is bound to be one of great destruction. Mr. Chairman, I'm now willing to answer the questions of your committee. I wrote this whole skit out. It's a lot of fun. So
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Okay. And then there's poetry. You don't have to look far and wide. This is Harvey Shapiro, and here, those of you who have a more poetic sense can appreciate this. Maybe you have familiarity with some of the associations. Exodus, Harvey Shapiro. When they escaped, they carried a pack of bones in a mummy coffin like an ark. Of course, they had the pillar of clouds by day and fire by night, but those were like dreams or something painted on the sky. God was in the bones because Joseph had said, God will remember you if you take me hence. This was before the miracle by the sea or the thundering mountain, before the time of thrones and cherubim. There were only now drawn forth to eat the history feast and begin the journey. And then should they carry history like an ark and the remembering already begun. So it's kind of deep. It's what are we carrying with us and how we take the past with us into the future. That's that poem. Okay. What's so fascinating about the Seder is that it has so many different valences for us. And I love, the little research that you can do about Seders, just by reading things or picking up a new Haggadah. I got this last year. This is called, Fruits of Freedom. This is one of my colleague, Jeremy Kalmanovsky. He knows the author of this. The author is this fellow. He's a teacher at the Heschel School in Manhattan. And he's done a lot of research on some of the historical and botanical relationships with Passover, etc. And there's some interesting little tidbits in here. And, any good new Haggadah will have some information like that. So in this, I picked up, he got do you ever ask yourself what's the origin of the Seder plate? I asked myself this year because I've seen new Seder plates being produced with The traditional Seder plate has 5 or 6 little dish spots, right? But now we're getting Seder plates that are being made with up to like 10, 11, 12 spots, because it seems that there are new things being added all the time to the Seder as triggers for discussion. Olives, for example, chocolate, cashews, I've seen, they've been added. The orange for feminism, the olives for peace, I think chocolate was for slavery in our time, fair trade kinds of things, cashews, I forget. So depending on what your political flavor is, there will be other kinds of foods added to the Seder plate, and to the extent to which you want to have your Seder go off in those directions. But the origin of symbolic foods and putting on a plate, that's pretty late. That's 16th century. Katel, is it your hand for this one or before? Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, so I understand all these extra pieces, so I'm thinking about this. So as we add these extra pieces, what may we actually be losing from the original? If we will we lose focus? Will people lose focus and go to other pieces and just make short shrift of the Seder, the Haggadah itself, and focus on all this new stuff?
Right.
The Seder is a work and is always going to be very innovative, and it's always going to be somewhat impromptu, and also something that people will create meaning for on the spot. The broad themes that these symbols evoke are the theme of particularism versus universalism. I tend to be very conservative in thinking about the particularistic elements of the Passover experience. But we understand, of course, that what's the good of all your particularism if it's not shared, if it's not, it doesn't radiate beyond your own life. You have to be concerned about the world. You have to be concerned. Like, for example, would you have known if you just Googled slavery, okay? You'd be surprised at what extent slavery still exists today, that slavery exists in slave trafficking, especially of women, and that it is alive and well, both in this country and all over the world. And why is that? And why does it happen? And what should we do related to that? Now, should we devote a whole Seder to that? I don't think so. But could we devote a whole Seder and not talk about the fact that these kinds of issues exist today in the world? I don't think so either. So the Seder really reinforces our own particularity with the idea that we are to emerge into the world with a greater sensitivity and awareness of these things. And Susie, there are more slaves today than at any time in history. That's correct. Okay. All right. I discovered a piece of unusual information. I didn't realize that not too far away from here, Rabbi Eliezer Meir Preil, which is Rabbi Teitz's father-in-law, Judy's not here with us, would have asked her about this. They used to make karpas on a banana. Did you know that? Next time you talk to Judy, Marlene, ask her about bananas for karpas, okay? All right? Chametz in Egypt. This we've heard. The prohibition of chametz on Pesach has some relationship with the extensive culture of bread and beer and production in Egypt. Bread, of course, the scholars, historians, from what I've read, they're not in agreement as to when bread is invented and how fermentation is discovered. But it seems that it takes off in Egypt, and that there's this in the pantheon of Egyptian gods, there are gods who are connected to this whole process, because for those for individuals who didn't know how to use a microscope, that is to say, people who didn't understand what microorganisms are, and certainly what yeast was, how do you explain fermentation? How do you explain that all of a sudden you're taking a watery mixture that has a little sweetness into it, and if it sits for a few days, it either turns sour or under certain conditions it develops alcohol. It's hard to explain that if you don't know a little bit of science. I don't know, Bob, if you were a pre-modern person, how would you explain fermentation?
Oh, no.
You don't know? Okay. Bonnie, you raise your hand. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was taking this kind of class online, and it's the word sa'or is used in the Bible to indicate you should. The translation says to get the chametz out of your house, but actually, Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was teaching the class, says that the Egyptians had bread made from starter, like we have sourdough bread. They had
Right.
starter. And actually, one of the things is to the Jews should feel differently because they'll have different bread. No, they're not taking the starter with them into the desert.
I think he's right on that, and that's part of, you see that. I see that in fact in this Haggadah he makes the mention of something similar to that, which is the problem that Jews have immediately following Passover is that they can't bake bread. That is, Jews in pre-modern times, or Jews who live prior to prepared yeast, right? Yeast preparation is like commercial yeast wasn't available to the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, if I'm not mistaken. So how did people, make breads? Well, they made breads because they had starter doughs, they had pre-existing doughs, and they just kept a little batch around. And so what your dough is simply, your dough is related to a previous dough. But at Pesach, you had to end all of that. You had to destroy all of that starter. And those of you who know how to bake know that it takes a few days to make a starter. There's a course online about how to make your own sourdough. So to make your own sourdough, you take a mixture of flour and you take water and you let it sit at room temperature and you stir it, and then you stir it some more and you let it sit some more. You add some flour to it, you add some water to it, and the natural spores in the air and the natural yeast spores in the ground grain itself are the spores that begin to cause the fermentation. And it's quite true that in different parts of the world, you'll get different strains, and the different strains will yield different flavors, for which people who know these things or are expert on it, they have preferences. And also, of course, certain kinds of wheat yield different kinds of consistencies and different kinds of glutens, etc. And if there's a whole science of this and an art, obviously. Okay, matzah evolved. I think I've talked about this before, but the matzah that we eat today is not the matzah of the Exodus. How did matzah become a cracker? Originally, matzah was soft, more like a pita or laffa bread. The Hillel sandwich is probably what we would identify as a burrito. Korech in Hebrew means to bundle. The change from spongier, unleavened bread to thin, flat crackers happened over time. Fear that the dough would not be fully baked led to baking thinner batches of dough at higher temperatures. By the end of the 18th century, people wanted to have a supply of matzot in advance of Passover rather than bake them on Passover itself, which was the norm. Originally, softer matzot were baked by women at home. Thinner matzot were made from denser dough, needed more upper body strength for kneading, and matzah baking came out of the home into the central bakeries. With the advent of urbanization, the rise of professional baking, more efficiencies were introduced. Dry matzot could last longer. Mechanized matzah production began 1838. Round, handmade dry matzot gave way to square sheets made from one continuous strip of dough. So, we don't make our own matzah for one very simple reason. You can, There's nothing that is not Pesach about having flour in your home, and actually, but you have to understand that you have to the mixture of flour and water has to be completed before 18 minutes. That stringency makes it completely undesirable to want to make it, and the fear that you might have a minuscule amount of chametz as a result of making your own matzah on Pesach is what prevents people from doing it. And in general, nobody makes matzah on Pesach anymore for that reason. But not too long ago in the history of Judaism, Jews were baking matzah on Pesach, provided that they were very, very careful about washing their utensils immediately after mixing the flour and the water, so as to not have any minuscule amount of chametz in their midst. And their interpretation of the rules may have been lenient. The whole discussion of what the proportion of chametz in a mixture is allowed prior to Pesach and on Pesach, that there's the voluminous the discussion of that in the sources. Okay, so when we enjoy eating. I mean, our experience of Passover would not be recognizable to those who observed it, maybe 3 or 4 centuries ago, because what we understand matzah as a cracker, they understood matzah more as a kind of spongy quick bread. Quick bread is more like, well, yeah, okay. All right. Hear about Elijah. Elijah, 15th century, okay. Danny Mann has a new book called Becoming Elijah. He says as follows, on Passover, Elijah is literally liminal, expected to appear on the threshold, anticipated at the doorway. He mediates between home and community, between private space and the wider uncertain world. I love this kind of discussion of it. It's part of, the themes that we talk about all the time here. He links the ancient liberation from Egyptian slavery with messianic deliverance, bridging the chasm between this unredeemed earth and the final redemption. And you'll like this story. The disciples of Menachem Mendel of Kotz complained to their master about their disappointment in not finding Elijah at the door during a previous Seder. He promised them that Elijah would be revealed to them at the upcoming Seder. On the first night of the festival, the room was full, the atmosphere charged, with Elijah's cup waiting on the table. The Seder proceeded, and finally the door was open. What happened next left the disciples astonished. Nothing! No one appeared. Crushed, they turned to their Rebbe, whose face was beaming. Seeing their distress, he asked, "What's troubling you?" They told him, "Fools," he thundered. "Do you think Elijah the prophet enters through the door? He enters through the heart." It's lovely. That's when you take. Now we have a sip of wine. Discuss. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes, go ahead.
I was on a shiur with Rabbi Alex Israel.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's British and he lives in
Pardes Yeshiva.
Yeah, and he said that many years ago, he was in London, coming home very late after having had a lot of wine at a much younger age, and he passed by a house where some Haredi family was just finishing its Seder, and this little boy opens the door, and he walked up and he said, "I'm here!" And the kid practically fainted, and then he just went on his way. He said, "So if you're ever in London and you hear some guy say, like I saw him when I was a little kid," he said, you'll know it was me."
Very nice, very nice. Okay, I wrote a commentary, just my short comment in the line, "Avadim ayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim." So on every word in that, and the 4 words, there are different things to talk about. What it means to be a slave. Hayinu, we were. How the story, based on the verse from the book of Deuteronomy, puts us exactly in there in the story. Hayinu as opposed to Avotenu. Lifaro, what is that? Who was Pharaoh? And Bimitzrayim. And we've talked about this over the course of teaching on the Parshas, but Gary Rensberg and I had this conversation we recorded last year about the place of Egyptology in the study of the Bible, and lots of new discoveries on that. And that's Avadim Ayinu Lefaro Mitzrayim. So when you get the sheet, you'll read that. And then I finally ended this up with, okay, so we have a minyan of rabbis in the Passover Haggadah. I think there may be more, but I counted up at least a minyan. Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yosef Glili, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah ben Zoma, Rabbi Huda, and Rabbi Gamliel. And we would not be here without the rabbis, and we certainly wouldn't have a Seder without the rabbis. The rabbis left an indelible imprint on the Passover experience, the Seder, and of course Judaism altogether. And these individuals, probably more than most, but not exclusively, were the architects of this experience. And I'm going to stop here just to just talk about this for 2 seconds, which is, and I know we're over, is that part of what they're trying to answer is, how do we create an experience that binds people together in the absence of the central feature of this holiday that no longer is accessible to us, namely the Passover sacrifice. We're not going into our backyard, slaughtering animals and roasting them. That experience is gone. And that experience must have been so incredible for people who had experienced it. How do you translate that to another generation? And so the story and the storytelling becomes the central element, the central feature of the evening, and the food becomes another feature of the evening, such that you are not to leave the table without the taste of the symbolic food on your mouth. That is to say, the afikomen, which is the post meal morsel, that is to stay with you. And there's a whole history of that. What is an afikomen, and the afikomen was part of the Greco-Roman banquet, the after meal. So you don't, the Passover meal is complete, and you don't have anything following the consumption of the Passover sacrifice. That should be the residual taste that you have in your mouth. And the trauma of losing all of that, I think, channeled the creative efforts of those individuals to structure and create the holiday that we lovingly celebrate each year. Bob, go ahead. You're muted. You gotta unmute, Bob. Unmute yourself and start over.
Do you have any thoughts as to the location of the Seder at this part in Leviticus? And could this in any way be a gigantic sort of tsarat that the people are in fact dealing with in terms of coming back?
Right.
Well, I'm not sure I understand what do you mean the location of the Passover in Leviticus?
The timing in the year that it's taking place right in these passages that we've been reading in the Parshot.
So the easy answer is that the Parsha cycle has nothing to do with the holiday cycle. That's the easy answer. But the more difficult answer is, so what? So we are reading this at this time, and how do you relate the holiday to these things? I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go as far as to say that like you said, that it's a kind of, experience. But I would say that part of the elements in Vayikra, namely how to conduct the proper ritual life in a state of purity, those are prerequisites for the Passover sacrifice. And since the Passover sacrifice employed the apparatus of, the sanctuary and later to the temple, all of the things that are connected to the proper maintenance and running of the temple were necessary for the Passover sacrifice. So in a way, you can say Vayikra functions as the kind of manual for proper ritual life of the people, of which the Passover celebration was a part. Steve.
Yeah, Rabbi, can we access any of these documents
Yeah, I'm going
online?
to get them. I'm going to send them out to you. We'll get them out in the shul.
They'll be
Have
printed
any
in the
comments
shul?
on vegetarian Seders?
Just a second.